And Dave, it's all you.
All right. Good morning, everybody, or at least it's morning here in Michigan. Welcome to the first ever Mastery Grading Conference, and we're glad you're able to make it. I am going to talk you through a couple of things right now. The first is you can find all sorts of information on our website, masterygrading.com, including a schedule. And there's a link to a Slack community that we'll say more about in the future for you to be able to keep track of things in the future. And finally, Zoom links for every session are in your email, and so that's something to know about. But right now, we're going to do a couple quick introductions. So right now, you should be able to see pictures as well as our video, but pictures of the four organizers of this conference. We're going to just very briefly say hi and a little bit about ourselves and our history with Mastery Grading. I'm David Clark. I'm at Grand Valley State University, which is in West Michigan. And I've been using Mastery Grading across many different classes, from intro level up to graduate level for about 8 years now. And so Mastery Grading really does work at all those different levels in different ways. Sharona?
Hi, I'm Sharona Krinsky. I'm actually an adjunct faculty member, contingent instructor at California State University, Los Angeles. And I blame Kate for the fact that about 3 or 4 years ago, and Josh Bowman, that I got into Mastery Grading, and I'm known as the crazy person who did it at scale with about 50 some odd instructors at Cal State LA. So we'll be talking about that throughout the thing. Kate, it's all you.
Hi everybody, I'm Kate Owens. I'm from the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. I started thinking about these issues and about Mastery Grading sometime maybe around 2013, 2014, and switched a lot of my courses over to that kind of format. I teach a lot of our entry-level, major-level, 100 and 200 level courses and have applied Mastery Grading principles in a wide variety of courses over the last 5 or 6 years. I'm really excited about this conference and hearing from all of our panelists. All right, Robert.
Hey everybody, I'm Robert Talbert. I am also at Grand Valley State University, one of David's colleagues. I'm a professor there and currently, at least for the next 3 weeks, chair of the department at Grand Valley State. And I'm really proud to be in a department with so many folks who are leaders and great users and innovators in grading and many other things as well. I started using Mastery Grading 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I switched actually almost mid-semester. Not switch my current classes, but I had about 6 weeks to prep for my next semester's classes and decided I was done with points-based grading and just flipped it all. It was quite a ride, and it has been quite a ride, but I've been really pleased with how it's helped my students learn and how it's helped them in a number of ways. And I'm very excited for this conference, which has been 2 years in the making. I think it started with me bumping into David in the hallway to say, yeah, we ought to do some kind of like a little get-together of people who are all interested in Mastery Grading. And now here we are with hundreds of participants and all sorts of other people. So I'm really, really glad you're taking time out of your day, and hopefully tomorrow as well. I know you're busy. It's a crazy time for all of us. Really appreciate your time and what you're going to contribute to this conference the next couple of days.
Okay, so this one's mine, right? We are recording this webinar, and we're going to be posting the recordings and slides so you can review them later, and we are retaining the right to read, broadcast, and distribute the recording. So by participating, you're agreeing that your contributions will become part of this recording. This is including video if you're one of the panelists, audio, chat, and Q&A. So I did want to take a moment to introduce all of you to the different ways that you're going to be able to participate. This is using the Zoom webinar format, which some of you may or may not have been a part of. There's a couple of different ways that you can participate. One is, and we are seeing quite a bit of this, in the chat. So if you are in the chat, if you could please make sure to mostly post to all panelists and attendees. If you post to just the panelists, we end up having very strange one-sided conversations. This is a really good back channel where you can talk with everyone, put your contributions in. Probably not the best place for some of the bigger questions that you think that we might want to address live. So bigger questions, we're going to recommend that you use the Q&A. If you place a question in the Q&A, we will either answer it by typing it or answer it live. Towards the end of the session, if we have time for Q&A, at that point, we will ask you if you would like to speak live, there is a raise your hand button in the participants panel, and you can raise your hand to speak using audio, and at that point we will give you the right to unmute yourself. So right now you do not have control over muting. You don't have to worry about your dogs and your kids, but later on throughout the conference, if there's an opportunity to do if you would like to speak live, we'll give you that chance. All right, David, let me get the next one. So I do want to spend a minute to thank College Bridge. College Bridge is a nonprofit organization that is sponsoring this conference. They came in and I work with them. I've worked with them for about 4 years. They do alignment in mathematics to align pathways from K-12 through college. So they are paying for the technology that is supporting this, as well as some of our back-end support. I did want to introduce one person whose video you're not going to see. He's going to be monitoring the chat, and that is Robert Bosley, who is with Cal State LA and Los Angeles Unified School District. So you'll be seeing him pop up in the chat quite a bit.
Right, and thank you all. As I learn the details of running this technology, it's a little bit new for me. So if you see anything strange happen, it's my fault. I'm going to begin by giving you a quick overview of the day and then get us started here. Today's big focus is, what is mastery grading? What is it? Why do we care about it? What's our philosophy of it? And so the next thing you're going to see after our introductions here is a series of speakers talking. I'm a mathematician, a sequence of speakers talking about their philosophy of mastery grading and assessment, and why do we care, and how does this work with students? You'll notice that we have offline breaks of about half an hour between most of our main sessions. And so after that, you're going to go offline, and we'll say a little more about at the end of this session about what you'll need to do just before you go offline. But right now, I am going to introduce Kate Owens, one of our organizers, who's going to start by telling you a bit about her experience with mastery grading and assessment.
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. So like I said, I'm Kate Owens. I'm the Associate Chair of the Department of Mathematics at College of Charleston. Like I mentioned before, I started thinking about some of these big questions 5 or 6 years ago, and the two that sort of stuck out to me the most were, why do we assign grades? And what kind of messages are those grades sending to our students, both about our courses and about what we think about them, what we think about the learning process, what we think about education more broadly. Some of the questions I've had about grades is, what do I want my own grades and my own courses to reflect? I mean, I teach a lot of first-year incoming students. I teach a lot of calculus classes. What is it that's most important to me that their grades reflect? When I give them this information, what kind of messages am I trying to send to them? Am I trying to talk to them about what they've learned so far, where they could improve, where I think that they're going to end up at the end of the semester? Am I trying to send messages about their behavior, about my expectations for them, about their past shortfalls, or if there's places to improve? As everyone knows, as part of our homework, we asked every one of the attendees to do a pre-conference assignment and ask them about, why do we grade? So I made a word cloud here about that question. So this is about the top 200 words that came out of those answers. And you can see a lot of the big ones are things I would expect, things about students. You can see learning popping up, some stuff about motivation, a little bit of stuff about hope. I think that all of these kind of words are the things that have been floating around in my head for the last several years. The reason that I made this switch was because I began seeing a lot of problems with my traditional grading scheme, my points-based grading. So I want to talk a little bit about the problems and issues that I saw in my own classes. The first one is students really have trouble knowing how that they're doing. I mean, they know that if they get a 78% on an exam, that they didn't quite get it all. Maybe they have some sense about what that means in terms of a letter, but they don't necessarily know how that connects back to the course material or to our learning goals. Students definitely struggle to compute their current grade or their future grade. I think regardless of what kind of classroom you work in, what kind of department you work in, we've all had the question, what do I need to make on the final exam to get a B+ in this class? And I've even taught in statistics courses where we go over doing weighted averages and we go over the same calculation, and they can do it when it's a test problem, but when it comes to their own grade, if you hand them the syllabus, they really struggle with that, and that's always been really frustrating for me. Giving meaningful advice to my students has always been very important. During my office hours, my students would come and ask me, how can I do better in your class? And a lot of times I didn't know until we looked back at that student's quiz or that student's test. I might have gradebook level information. You know, they made an 81 on the first test and a 96 on test 2 and a 71 on test 3. And I didn't know why that was or what advice I could give. I couldn't tell if this was all related to some conceptual stuff or to some study habit stuff, if this is related to their mathematical practices. It was very hard. We lose so much information in a points-based system, information on how students could improve or how they have been improving over time. There's always been a huge disjunction for me between what my grades show and what my course goals really are. If my goal of a course is for a student to really develop an understanding about the fundamental ideas of calculus, it was hard for me to pinpoint if a student had done that. There are lots of many different students who maybe all got a B+, and it was hard for me to know, which of them had really mastered those fundamental ideas. It's definitely possible to get through my courses and even do pretty well and still miss some of the really big key concepts. And of course, the last thing is something that's been on all of our minds lately, issues about having an inclusive classroom and issues about equity and what kind of messages we're sending with our grades about the learning process has really been on all of our minds lately. So it's these kind of issues that brought me toward mastery grading. And here's the philosophy that I settled on for my own kinds of courses. I believe that grades should reflect demonstrated mastery of the course content, and that those grades should have a positive effect on student learning. So part of it is that I want to motivate the students to continue to improve over time. I want to create a structure within my own courses that allows for that improvement, that involves the student in their own learning path, and then gives them a path forward to know how they can improve into the future. So we made this jump to mastery grading. So for those of you that don't know what it is, here's sort of our big picture definitions about what is mastery grading. This is adapted from a document called Introduction to Mastery Grading, and we'll have this linked on our resources page. So mastery grading maybe has 3 big features regardless of our implementations, and you'll hear from a lot of different panelists who've implemented it quite differently across different departments in their courses. The first thing that a lot of these things have in common is that students are given upfront a clear list of learning objectives, learning targets. Some people call these standards, some people call these goals, but that list is distributed early on as a point of the course. The second thing is those learning standards are measured in terms of overall mastery. So students aren't getting a problem out of 14 points where they score 11 points out of 14 points. Usually most instructors develop some kind of sliding scale from no mastery shown, no information available, through full mastery being available for that particular goal or that particular standard. The last thing is really important. Eventual mastery matters. So shortfalls that occur early in the semester, usually there's some mechanism to make up for those. So those could be rewrites, revisions, retesting, lots of different ways to do that. But the idea there is to give students information about where they are at present and give them a path forward to improve on those learning targets, specifically about the mastery that they're trying to go. All right. We're going to now hear from a bunch of different panelists about some of their ideas, some of their big picture philosophy on how they approach this. So with that said, we're going to hand it over to Rachel Weir, who's going to talk to us. Rachel?
Thanks, Kate. So I'm Rachel Weir. I teach at Allegheny College. I'm currently the department chair there. Just a few facts about Allegheny, just so you know what my setup is. So we were established in 1815. We're a small private liberal arts college. You can see information about our department there. The photos there are Bentley Hall, which is our oldest building, and then Arter Hall, which is where our math department is located. So as Kate did, I'm going to talk first of all a little bit about how I came to mastery grading, and then about my current kind of philosophies about teaching, how I kind of view my classes these days. And this journey is, so I'm going to talk about my own journey as an educator, acknowledging that this journey is continuing and that I continue to learn every day, but it actually is quite related to current events, particularly around the murder of George Floyd and others, and the subsequent protests and police brutality. So really some connections there between how I ended up where I am. So I taught my first mastery grading course in spring of 2016. I think I came to mastery grading after reading a blog post by Robert Talbot, so thank you, Robert. Since then, I've made use of mastery grading in every course that I've taught since that time. And I started to incorporate a bunch of changes into my teaching around 2014 and 2015. And the reason for that timing is, as I said, Allegheny was established in 1815. So we had our bicentennial in 2015. And on either side of that, we had these year of themes. So the first one was the year of civil rights, and the second one was the year of voting rights and democratic participation. And they both featured a lot of events and discussion groups and courses and things like that. So as a foreigner, I'm from New Zealand. I felt a little underprepared when I was asked to participate in this, but in the end, my involvement really transformed how I think about my teaching and opened my eyes to so many things, including racial inequities and injustices. So I can't say that I'm an expert on any of these topics, but I can say that I have this awareness that I hope continues to permeate my professional life. And it led me to mastery grading and to inquiry-based learning, or IBL, these are the two main math teaching communities that I'm involved with these days. So a few weeks ago, I participated in an equity workshop in connection with my work on the upcoming IBL summer workshops. Shout out to BK on that. And we were asked to take a few minutes to formulate one of our guiding principles for teaching. And that's what you can see. What I came up with is what you can see on the screen here. And it was just a few minutes of thinking, but after reflecting on this afterwards, it really sums up how I feel about my approach to my classes these days. So I just want to highlight a couple of things. So every student is both entitled to and capable of experiencing success and joy. So there's this belief, I mean, we can start with the belief that all of our students are capable of succeeding, but I think that even more so, they have the right to be able to succeed in math courses. So many, actually, David, can you go back to the previous slide? So many of our courses are treated like weed out courses, and I think that's, that we need to really be moving away from that. And then also in terms of not just experiencing success in mathematics, but joy in mathematics, because we as mathematicians, we've experienced that. And we know it doesn't come from memorizing formulas or doing the same kind of problem over and over again. It comes from discovering and understanding patterns and working on a problem for a really long time, and then finally having that moment of understanding. And those are the kinds of things that I want my students to understand. And that doesn't mean that they're doing research in mathematics. It could just be that they're finally understanding why you add the exponents when you multiply two things with the same base. So things that to them are great discoveries. It doesn't have to be anything huge. And I want to acknowledge here that if I think back to the me of 10 years ago and this guiding principle, I probably would have thought it was a bit touchy-feely and goofy, but I really have moved around to this point and feel that this is really where I want to be in terms of my teaching, at least at this point. So in terms of how I try to achieve this in my classes, I just sort of brainstormed a few key ideas. So first up, beginning with the belief that all of my students can succeed. And so I view myself more as their cheerleader than their instructor. And I'm always encouraging them, telling them they can do it no matter what. And also from time to time, reminding myself that this is one of my core, should be one of my core beliefs, because it's easy to slip into old thought patterns. I also try to acknowledge that they have what I call previous math trauma. So if anyone who's asked their students to write a math autobiography has seen the kinds of stories that they tell about their math experiences, the teacher that told them that they were stupid and they weren't going to understand, the courses that were just incredibly painful for them to take. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge all of that along the way. I do try to hold my students to high standards, but I think in connection with that, it's also important to provide the structure and support to help them to succeed. So this could be introducing everyone to study skills or habits of mind that have been shown to lead to success in math courses, so that everyone's starting from an equitable place. Or it could be just laying out clear learning objectives and specifications for my assignments, so they know what I'm expecting and what they should focus on. Along with that, it also means destigmatizing mistakes and failure. So always emphasizing that we learn from our mistakes, and so we need to provide space for students to make those mistakes, learn from them, and then move forward. And any attempt that they make, whether it's successful or not, is progress. And in connection with this, I also try to foster growth mindset, self-belief, and self-efficacy. So and it's great to see when their confidence starts to build over the course of the semester, and they start to realize they're capable of more than they thought. And that to also acknowledge that struggle is part of the learning process. And so to see them having those experiences where they stick with it and struggle through and come to the deeper understanding. And then finally, perhaps after weeks of struggle, when they finally pass that one learning objective that they've been attempting over and over again, to encourage them to pause and to see what they did, to enjoy that moment. That's the thrill right there that we're searching for. So anyway, I don't remember if all of this led me to mastery grading, or mastery grading kind of led me to these ideas, but I feel like it's all kind of connected. It was probably a bit of both. But suffice it to say that I don't think that I could incorporate the things that I want to into a traditional grading system. Mastery grading gives me a way to incorporate a variety of assignments and activities, so things like the math autobiography and study skills assignments, but it also supports things like fostering a growth mindset, valuing mistakes and failure, and all that. And so I hope that what you hear today and tomorrow convinces you to take the leap into mastery grading along with the rest of us, if you haven't already. So I'm pleased to now throw it over to Drew Lewis from the University of South Alabama. Thanks, Rachel.
So like Rachel said, I'm at the University of South Alabama. I'm a mathematician. And I don't really like to talk at people so much, so I've got a little activity I'd like us to work through instead. So the next slide here has basically a glimpse of what a traditional gradebook might look like. So in this class, there were 3 exams, and I have 4 students here with what their score on these exams were in kind of a traditional points-based system. So the question I want you to think about is, which of these students do you think learned the most? So if one of the organizers could go ahead and launch the poll there, you can respond in the poll. Which of these 4 students do you think learned the most? So if you think you need to make assumptions about these exams to answer, you can make whatever assumptions you like. And I cannot see how many people are responding to the poll, so I don't know how long we should keep this open. So David, just let me know when we've got.
We've got about 330 out of 361 so far. I'll close it when we get in about 10 seconds.
So as we close the poll, if you want to go ahead and throw your reasoning in the chat here. And can we share the results with everybody? All right. So it looks like the overwhelming favorite here is Tamara, okay? But we had some votes for Roger and Susie and very few votes for Vincent, okay? So kind of reading some of the thoughts in the chat here, I see Keenan points out that growth throughout the semester is a really important factor. And I think that's what most of us who are looking at Tamara are saying, that she grew throughout the semester, whereas Vincent kind of took the opposite approach, right? And I see Jane points out that Susie may have just been doing very well, but something could have happened at exam 2. We don't know this, right? But if we just take kind of the naive approach and just wanted to do an average of these things, these students would all get the same grade. I don't know if anybody tried to do some arithmetic in their head, but these all average out to 75%. So a quick average here obscures a whole lot about what's going on with these 4 very different students. So on the next slide here, I've got a picture that I think really illustrates what differences we can see among students. So this is from a calculus class I had a few years ago. And the x-axis there is time. So the numbers there are the class days. So this was a 15-week class that met 4 days a week. So that's why we go up to 60 days there. And the y-axis is the content mastery over the semester. So we have 2 students, one in red and one in blue. And so if we look at the red student here, you can probably guess how many exams we had in this class. Right, you can see these big jumps in the number of things they've mastered. So there's 4 of those big jumps, and there were the 4 exams. So the red student there was very, very good at taking these kind of traditional exams. And the blue student, you can barely even pick out when that first exam was from that very small jump. And same thing for, I think, the 4th exam there. But what I want to really point out about this graph is that they end up at virtually the same place, right? So they kind of took 2 very different paths to get there, but they end up at the exact same place or very close to the same place at the end. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So the point I want to leave you with is that our students learn differently. So students learn at different paces. Right? If we say we're going to have an exam on this day, that's going to measure maybe what they know on that particular day, but it doesn't tell you anything about what they learned the day after the exam. Okay? Some students are going to learn in a nonlinear fashion, right? They're going to have big jumps at different points in the semester, and that's not necessarily going to line up with your particular assessment schedule. And sometimes external factors can change a student's learning timeline. So I think we saw a lot of that this spring, right? Where lots of people's things were disrupted very much. And if we go back to our example, I think it was Susie who had a very low percentage on exam 2. It's very likely that something disrupted her life in the middle there, and that's not really reflective of how she's doing. So what I want to leave you with is kind of this axiom here at the bottom, is that what a student learns is much more important than when they learn it. And note that what that implies is that our grading system should try and measure what they learn regardless of when they learn it. So if we think about maybe a traditional grading system where we have particular exams on particular days, that's really measuring what a student knows on particular days. So what I want to leave you with is how we can think about changing this so that we're really capturing what they learn by the end of the semester rather than on particular days. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Drew, and Rachel as well. And I am going to leave you with, well, leave you sounds like we're ending quickly, but I'm going to present you with a bunch of different statements, essentially, that I think are maybe mildly provocative from my point of view and might be much more provocative from others' points of view about what mastery grading is and isn't. And as I'm just skimming the chat here, and yes, whoever just noticed that, I'm wearing the same shirt as I was in this picture. Thank you. I am nothing if not consistent. But as I'm skimming through the chat here, I'm seeing a lot of fantastic discussion. And one of our goals today is to give you a sense of what mastery grading is and what the mindset is that might lead you to use it. And of course, if you're here, you're probably interested in it. You don't have to end up using it. But I do want to definitely address what are some of the things that you should be thinking about, and what are the things that perhaps you should not be thinking about. And I would encourage my fellow panelists here to jump in if you wish to on some of these statements that I'm making. I have gone through these back and forth, left and right, rearranging and changing how I'm saying it, because these are based on my experience in mastery grading. And so some of these, here we go. Let's see. First, I want to convince you, hopefully through this whole conference, that mastery grading comes in many flexible varieties, and it can be used at all different levels. And that includes, since most of us here are mathematicians, writing proofs, writing in general, standards for practice, but also more skill-based or introductory classes. One thing that we saw a lot of in the pre-conference assignment were responses thinking that perhaps mastery grading might only work for classes where you're assessing skills or introductory classes, and about an equal number of responses saying something like, mastery grading seems like it only works for classes that are upper level or proof-based. And so I hope to convince you that we can work across the range. At this conference in particular, we're not promoting any one type of mastery grading. And if you read the pre-conference assignment, there are convenient names for quite a few different varieties of mastery grading: standards-based grading, mastery-based testing, specifications, and so on. Many of these developed independently, and they developed for slightly different reasons or with different goals, and that each of them is useful in different contexts. And so we're not selling one of those here. We are trying to convince you of the overall philosophy and how you might choose what works best for you based on the things we're seeing here. Another big point, and this is based on our definition for mastery grading, is that mastery grading eliminates student focus on points because we're not working with points or partial credit anymore. It shifts it instead to mastering content, to focusing on what have I learned and how do I know that I've learned it. One interesting consequence of that is that it also changes your focus as the instructor when you're designing activities and when you're designing your own assessments. There is always a moment when I'm converting a class that I have previously taught using points and percentages, and I've decided that I'm going to change it over to mastery grading. And at this point, I almost have no classes left that I'm using partial or points in. But when I make that conversion and I'm looking at an exam, and I'm saying, okay, what were the objectives I was assessing on this exam? I feel embarrassed when I discover that one objective showed up 5 times, 2 others showed up once, and a bunch of other things that I've decided are important weren't on there at all. This focus on demonstrating mastery of specific content can change your focus in how you work in your class, what matters, and why it matters to you. Mastery grading also sets high standards. It sets really high standard. And I've seen a lot of debate going back and forth in the chat here about the word mastery, which is a bit of a loaded word. And I agree. I think it's worth having a discussion at some point about what is our term here. But the point I want to make on this slide is we're setting high standards. So the word mastery is what we're using for that. But we're also supporting growth, persistence, and learning through the other features of a mastery grading system. And one very important part about this is the word mastery here does not mean perfection. That's not what we're talking about. That mastery, or perhaps proficiency or competency, should be defined sensibly for your course. And in fact, this is something you will want to think about carefully. If you have an objective in mind, what would a student need to do to demonstrate mastery of that at an appropriate level? From one of the pre-conference readings, Austin Moore wrote a phrase that many of you called out as very useful to you. When assessing whether a student demonstrated mastery or not, would that student benefit from studying this again? That can help you really cut through some of the chaff to what's the central focus of your objective, and did a student meet that or not? And I'm curious if any of my fellow panelists here want to say anything about this in particular.
David, you know, one of the conversations we had in the last couple of days is not just mastery within the context of the course, but mastery for a period of time. Because many of us know that, you know, the old adage of when do you actually learn the mathematics is when you teach it. So if that's what we expect of ourselves, then what do we realistically expect of our students? So what, I don't remember which one of us said it when we had our little conference a couple days ago, but someone said, we're confident enough they know it well enough that if they had to learn it again, they could pick it up quickly. So that's another way to look at mastery.
And probably independently at that point also.
Exactly.
And once again, I'm working on the technology. Here we go. So mastery grading also fundamentally allows students multiple paths to success. We saw this in Drew's Tale of Two Students slide, right? And so that means that you also need to really believe that it's possible for a student to succeed in your class in multiple ways. That this might be through different types of assessments, but it might also be that they simply take a different path in terms of time. When do they come to understand things and when can they show it to you? Did a student have difficulties in the middle of the semester, but then they really got it together by the end? Did a student power through from the beginning? These are okay. And a fundamental shift in mindset here is that they shouldn't be penalized for that. And so this needs to be part of the philosophy behind switching to something like this. Mastery grading can reduce some of the inequities that we see very commonly in math classrooms in particular, in STEM for sure. And this is something that has to do with offering multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery that recognizes that students come to us with different initial levels of understanding and experience. They have different lived experiences. And this gives students an opportunity, if they come to us without the preparation we expected, to help them with that and not penalize them for it. However, this isn't a cure-all. There are many things that we need to do in our math classrooms, and mastery grading is not going to be a magic wand. Those of you who are familiar with professional development at the K-12 level are familiar with the idea of a magic wand coming in, somebody claiming that this is going to change and fix everything for you. We're not claiming that, but we are claiming that this is something that can help improve and reduce some inequities in your classroom, and that the philosophy and the mindset behind it can help even more. A big question from the pre-conference assignments is about buy-in. And mastery grading really does require buy-in, not just convincing your students of buy-in, but buy-in on your part as well as an instructor. That you need to believe in what you're doing. And this is also related to the fact that there's many different variations on mastery grading, and that you need to pick one that works for you, that fits your understanding and your philosophy. But from a practical standpoint, if you're using mastery grading in your class, it can't be explained once, maybe written in the syllabus, and then ignored. This is something that is going to be new and different for your students, and you need to almost be a cheerleader to convince them that this is something you believe in and that's going to be good for them. And so this probably means coming back to it, cycling around multiple times during the semester, just before that first big assignment, just after it, when they're trying to understand what the feedback was that you gave them, before the final exam, frequently with kindness, with thoughtfulness, and with a lot of positive energy on your part as well. Okay. Mastery grading, again, by our definition, fundamentally involves reassessments or multiple attempts because we're looking to assess eventual mastery by our students, not just one time and not just at one time. But another common concern was, what about the workload for us? What about the workload for teachers? And I will tell you, mastery grading does not have to take you 100 hours per week. Sometimes it's only 90, and that's no problem. But what I really mean is, mastery grading can be something that takes more time to initially set up as you are carefully setting up your class. Really, this almost always involves a form of backwards design as you're designing your class and your assessments from the standards, which means you have to understand what standards, objectives, or specifications you care about before you begin the class. But once you get into actually grading student work, it is a very quick type of decision that you're making. And that can be a source of a lot of efficiency and improvement for people using mastery grading, that we're making relatively quick decisions and we're focusing much more on student understanding, having productive conversations with students, and moving from there. So finally, I want you to know mastery grading is going to change the final grade distribution in your class. This is something I think all of us have seen. And that's because the way of grading changes what we value. It changes from a collection of partial credit or points to eventual mastery, and that will change who earns an A, who earns a B, and who doesn't. But one common criticism is mastery grading about, I want to give everyone an A eventually? Most of us have seen grades shift higher in many cases because students aren't being penalized for having difficulty initially. And that does often result in some higher grades. It also sometimes results in a few students ending up lower who haven't bought into the system as much. But you should know ahead of time that mastery grading will change your grade distribution, and that with a good solid foundation behind it, I think you'll be a lot happier with where it is. Do any of my fellow panelists have anything they'd like to say at this point about any of my statements so far?
David, we have a couple of Q&A questions that I think this would be a good time to pose to the panel.
Excellent. So we do have a few minutes that we can pose these questions.
Okay. So one of them we have is, what can help us communicate to our students what mastery means, what mastery looks like? They have a cultural construct of partial credit, getting points for following rules coming from earlier courses that is so damaging. Who is interested? Kate, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that this is a really common issue that a lot of us have faced about having students understand what the goals are in the assessment format of our courses when we make this kind of switch. I think that for me, part of that has been spending a lot more time just describing why I've made the choices that I have and why I really want to invest the time in the students developing the ability to improve over time and really focus on what our learning targets are. I think that getting student buy-in is really important. I think that when I go over, a particular problem in class, whether it's, from a homework problem that somebody asks me, I often talk about, how would we assess this? What would it mean if we saw a student make this type of mistake? Or what would it mean if we changed the solution in this particular way? Do we still give credit for this? What do you think the big idea is here? So showing students sort of a range of possible different solutions for a particular problem, and then saying, when I'm looking at this problem, here's the idea that I'm looking for, here's the standard I'm trying to measure against, and providing them those examples. And then also just, reiterating over, the first several weeks of the course about how this course format is different and why, how to help students adjust from the partial credit points-based scheme, the how and why of what we're doing over time. Anyone else want to?
Okay. We have another question that I have a feeling that I might be the one that has to answer, which is it a good idea to transition to mastery-based grading at the same time in learning how to teach online? My institution will be primarily online for fall. Anyone else want that, or is that one mine? Okay, so I'm actually a big fan of making this transition at the same time as you're transitioning online. We have an opportunity right now to disrupt education on so many ways. And I think it might actually be easier for students to make this transition to online with a more equitable grading system, which is what I view this to be and what my students have viewed this to be. I do find, and we're going to talk about this throughout the conference, that making the transition to online actually can sometimes be heavily facilitated if you've made this transition to mastery-based grading. It is going to be some emotional labor on the part of the instructor learning all this stuff at the same time, but I've found that they work very well together, and we can certainly talk about this. I'm going to go ahead and touch on a question that quite frankly scares me, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it out there because it is the elephant in the room. So we got a question from Courtney. Can we also talk about the racially loaded word mastery and other ways we can talk about the idea without bringing this term into the discussion? So I'm going to talk about the second half of that question first, which is other ways to talk about it. There are a lot of different names. When Primus started working on their their special issue a couple of years ago, that term was chosen to be an umbrella term, sort of the way that inquiry-based learning is an umbrella term. So we have specifications grading, we have standards-based grading, and one thing we hope that you will learn through the conference is that there are other language that can be used, that maybe should be used. I don't feel qualified to talk about the racial load on the individual word. What I will say is the system itself, in my opinion, and I've been teaching for over 30 years, is the most equitable grading system that I've come across in terms of giving every student the chance to succeed no matter what their prior math history or their barriers are. So hopefully that doesn't feel like a duck, because I don't intend to do that, but I'm definitely in the mode of listening more than speaking on this topic. So hopefully that's about the best I can do. And I agree with Andrew, words definitely matter. And this might be something that we want to continue to have this conversation throughout the conference. We've gotten a few more questions here. How do you talk to your department about implementing this type of grading? How do you get the department to buy in? Does anyone have a thought on that one? Robert?
I'd like to step in as a still for 3 weeks department chair. I will answer one question here. Is one great way to get department buy-in is to become the department chair. I mean, if you're really interested in long-term systemic change in your department, step up and start running for stuff. I mean, it's been great for me as an assistant chair and then as a department chair to basically say, you know, when I'm doing a merit review of a faculty member like David Clark, you know, to say like, he's using mastery-based grading. He is taking acceptable, educated risks that research and practice have shown to be really beneficial for students. And I'm kind of wondering, what about the rest of you? Why aren't you doing mastery-based grading? So when you get into the position of actually having a leadership position, think of this long-term as a strategy. Otherwise, I would say, you know, nothing succeeds like success. And if you take a step out in faith and put your students first and foremost in view for doing mastery-based grading or active learning or anything, not just because it's some sort of pedagogical fashion statement, but because it's something that's really going to be helpful for students, and collect data, collect stories, and present this to your department and show that it's really working, even if it's got some blips in the short term. It's very hard for other people to argue against that, I would say. So the best apologetic for any sort of pedagogical change is to simply student success, especially in this day and age where getting our students to be successful in these really trying times is sort of the coin of the realm.
Robert?
I'd also like to jump in quick and say, I forget who first said this. This idea is not original to me. But every institution that I know of, somewhere in their faculty handbook perhaps, has a definition, or student handbook, has a definition of letter grades. They describe what each letter grade means, and they're all written in terms of something that may not be phrased as mastery of material, but that's what it's getting at. And linking solidly back to those, and this is what I want my letter grades to mean, can be a pretty strong argument for what I'm doing is connecting directly to what we are claiming to do.
And either David or Robert, we have a follow-up to that. Someone who asked about, is buy-in challenging, especially in terms of students who end up with lower grades than in a traditional system? This person's experienced many significant experience with disgruntled male students complaining to department chairs as a female instructor.
One thing I find is that the conversations with those students can be difficult to have, but they're really valuable because the language has changed around from earning points to what have you demonstrated that you can achieve in this class. It's not, like I said, an easy conversation, but it is something that's a little more direct.
I would also say on my part that I actually don't tend to have students who do worse than a traditional grading system. My students who don't pass very, very clearly have not done the work and have not shown the growth, and they know it by the end.
Kate, I think you had something to say.
I think for me, in terms of my conversations with students, have actually gotten to be a lot better because of master grading type principles. Students who maybe would have originally failed, you know, the first test and tossed it in the trash can on their way out of the classroom or whatever, are now bringing their exam to my office, you know, a week or two later saying, I really want to know more about this idea. Can you help me understand this missing link? So I think that my conversations with students have changed because we're no longer talking about, why did I lose points on this, or, can you give me another point back? But instead of sort of big concepts that are related to the course, and because they know that I'm really interested in their learning over time and seeing that growth and supporting them through their growth, that those conversations have gotten easier because of this and not more challenging.
We have a few other questions. Does reassessment mean students can blow off a test because they can just reassess later? We are going to have an entire panel on reassessments, but does anyone want to look at that, address that first while we're still here?
I think that part of this is part of what I was saying about working on buy-in and talking repeatedly with students and encouraging them. Our students have, or they at least think they have, sort of an understanding of the rhythms of a class that's graded with points, and that they understand roughly, what they need to do and when they need to do it in terms of earning credit for things. And that's completely changed in a mastery grading class. They don't have this sort of many years built-in intuition for where's the focus and what do I need to worry about. The big exams, right? And so we have to communicate that to students, that this gives you a lot of great opportunities to come back from having trouble on things, to learn over time, but that you definitely need to give it your best choice or your best chance the first time through, because we can talk a little about how that means you might have to be doing more things later on if you're not doing it, if you're not demonstrating mastery of things initially. And while you have that opportunity, you don't want to count on having to pile a bunch of those up later. So communicating about that frequently is a really important part.
Okay. We have I think a very important question. Does mastery grading assume a basic structure of pedagogy? I know a lot of us in math who do mastery grading come from an IBL perspective of some kind, but is it mastery grading if you take a traditional math course and just change the assessment structure? Drew, I see you nodding. Would you like to maybe address that?
Yeah, mastery grading was kind of my way of getting into more active learning. So when I started doing it, I was very much lecturing and then adding some bits to my lecture. And then later I started doing inquiry stuff on top of that. So absolutely, you can do mastery grading with whatever you're doing in the classroom.
And I actually wanted to add again, I've been doing this stuff for 30 years. And in my opinion, the grading system change has been the single most impactful thing that I've done. And I've done it all from back when it was called cooperative learning and active learning. And as much as I love all that stuff, honestly, the grading system for me was more impactful than all those things.
I think Robert.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump in very quickly and to say, I don't do inquiry-based learning. You tailor it to what the course is and what the audience is. But I would say it's possible to do mastery-based specs grading without a fundamental focus on active learning, but it's very difficult to do this. If your course is organized around passive direct instruction and you're asking students to have their grades based on doing things, there's a fundamental misalignment, I think, between the pedagogy and the assessment. And these classes, and someone brought up earlier about online classes, I think that now is a perfect time to be doing mastery grading, because mastery grading and online learning both are rooted in having clear, actionable learning objectives. Okay, so if you're going to have learning objectives that drive the activities, that drive the assessments, all this stuff has to be aligned. And so I don't know if like specific pedagogical techniques are sort of determined or by mastery grading, but I would say that to do mastery grading well and to align what you're doing with what students are supposed to eventually do, there has to be a fundamental focus on action. Okay, action verbs, activities in the class that provide some practice with the action verbs, assessments that accurately capture the actions that students are supposed to be taking. So specifics may vary, but I think it really, really insists on the best possible platform is something that's an active learning platform.
We have quite a few really good questions. We don't have a lot of time to do them. What I would say, some of the detailed questions about how does homework play in, can you use group work, what's the role of homework, these will be answered in some of our panel sessions. We do have a question here that's really interesting. What is a typical grade distribution in a course with mastery grading? Who wants to take? Rachel, you haven't been chiming in too much. You want to share what your grade distribution is in these?
Probably varies by course, but I think what people said earlier about perhaps more sort of this bimodal, some people can't squeak by on just partial credit anymore, so that maybe there's some people dropping down, but then also other people who it's really clear to them what they need to do to get a higher grade, and so maybe that's allowing them to get a higher grade. So that's what I found as this kind of separation to the extremes, although I'm certainly not giving out all A's. That's certainly not the case.
There's something interesting that has happened to me, I think, every single time I have designed a mastery graded class. So every time I've set up the mastery grading aspect. One of the things you will hear about, I think tomorrow especially, is thinking about your grades from the point of view of what do I want a C to mean? What do I want an A to mean? And whenever I think about an A, I set it down, right? I say, this is what a student who earns an A should be able to do in this class. And then I always look at it and go, oh dear, that's a really high bar. Am I gonna be able to get through that? And I talk myself down and say, you know what? I can choose to be nicer later and somehow make the A level a little bit easier to achieve. And I haven't had to do that. I have been amazed at what students will rise to the occasion to do when there are the clear specifications for what do you need to do to succeed in this class. Students have done better and achieved that A, and more of them have done so. And I feel much, much better about the fact that they are earning those A's because I can point to exactly what it means.
I think that it is 8:56. We have lots of really great questions in the Q&A that we're not going to get time to get for. So please keep a hold of these questions. That's why we're doing a 2-day conference to try to answer every one of these questions. Okay, so I'm on the what's next, right? Okay,
Yep.
so we are going to be taking a coffee break. And what we mean by this is the next session is going to be breaking out in small groups so that a lot of the things that were done in the chat become a part of an opportunity to speak more individually with people. So what we'd like you to do is go ahead and when you get off of this Zoom link, go ahead and immediately go to your Table Talk link. And once you're in the Zoom, then go get your coffee. The goal is to get everyone into the breakout groups before the 12:30 Eastern time, because at that point we will open the breakout rooms, and crossing our fingers the technology works. It will automatically send most people to their breakout groups. Some people have had some technical issues. It might take us a few minutes to get you in there. So if you could please, before you go and get your coffee and take a break, go to your Table Talks name. Now, everyone, including the table hosts, you're going to go to the link that's associated with the first 2 letters of your last name as you registered. And then from there, you will be automatically assigned into breakout rooms. Panel, any last comments or thoughts before we go? Nope. Okay. So we will see you in just a few minutes over in the Table Talks links. Thank you very much. Bye.